Watercolor is almost always done on paper and it's framed behind glass. And I've wondered whether that glass makes us too distant from the work. So this month, inspired by Pablo Picasso, I decided to see what happens if I paint without watercolor paper. So I finally pulled out a surface that I had for years now because I just felt like intimidated by it, and I'm sure you have something like that in your studio. I also tried to paint on copper just to see how far watercolor could stretch. I wanted to find out how each surface might change not just what I paint, but how I paint it. I was flipping through books, revisiting his bowls, the sketches that get simpler and simpler until they're just a few confident lines. That idea of reducing something to its essence has fascinated me. But the painting that stayed with me most wasn't one of the famous ones. It was The Woman in Mantilla, which I saw years ago in Barcelona. I loved it because it looked unfinished, but it didn't need to be finished. It was already beautiful. That's what I wanted to explore through this, how the surface can amplify or quiet what we're trying to say as artists. So I want to share what I've learned from my first study of the bowl. I have bought boards from Ampersand before, so this was the clay board, and these were back from 2023 when I just was interested in using Ampersand when I was living in Germany. And I just felt like it was really close to Yupo paper, and I enjoyed it, but not as much. And I just thought, you know, for intuitive paintings that have a lot of movement and you want to feel like you're out of control, it was a good surface to use on, and they come very sturdy. And I can definitely see how we can just place this, glue it on a cradle board, and it's ready to go. So I kind of enjoyed it, but I then realized that, oh, clay board and aqua board are different. So I did get this aqua board. It was like 17 euros. I don't know how much it is in US dollars, but I got these and I never touched them. And this is what I had in 2023. I'm sure you have these things in the studio where it's from way ago, but you haven't touched it. So this was one of those things that I've not touched, but I always thought I'll be ready someday. And very, very luckily, I asked Ampersand if they will be willing to send me some of their panels, like in a specific size, and they sent this full package to me. This is not sponsored, by the way. I was just interested to understand the surface before I used that big board. And they do sell these test panels in small sizes, so you might want to see how it works and understand it before using the big sizes, because they are not cheap. So this was the first study that I did of the bowl, stage 5, because that's exactly the stage that I love. And first I used a technical pencil to go over to sketch it first, and then use Mars Black by Schminke to go over these shapes, leaving the whites. And I really enjoyed it. What I would say is that these don't do really well with tons of water. So if you have tons of water in your brush, it basically spreads out, and it's so absorbent, but it really spreads out the water. So even if I say want to get a very specific shape, like a round shape by splatters, you know, typically watercolor paper would get that clearly, like you can see the edge of it even if you make splatters. But what I feel like typically happens with these, basically it's a clay board, I believe, but basically it absorbs it, so it doesn't create that much like outline of that shape, if you know what I mean. So having less water seems to do the trick. And when you dip your brush into the water and then get some of that paint, you would definitely need a paper towel to then soak up the water slightly and then go into the painting, and that seemed to work really well for me. And what I've noticed is it's the control. Like I needed to go through this past 2 years of understanding watercolor more and more, so then I felt very comfortable. I was able to question myself, what seems to work for this surface and what doesn't, compared to what my norm is. So those are some of the key things I think will be very beneficial to understand when you're working in a different surface. So I've realized that less water, building up layers is very important for this. And I really enjoyed working on this one. My second study was on this copper plate. So it's metal plate from Artifacts. I was very interested. They do this whole, we'll give you one for free. This came free. It took about a month or so, but I just thought, oh, I'm very interested to use it because I love metal leaves, so why not, right? But the problem with these metallic plates is that water will be repelled, so I needed to put a ground, and I didn't have a transparent ground. Now, talking about grounds, I have done a few experimentations in I think this was from 2023 again. I think this was Watercolor ground by Daniel Smith on this side, and then core, Daniel Smith, and then core, and then separated the ground. So this is just a normal cheap panel that I got back in Munich, and I put layers of different watercolor ground to see how that works, and it was kind of fun. But I think at that time I was really into intuitively working, and while it was wet, I couldn't wait for that drying time as much. So I didn't go into more detail with this work. So this is where it kind of was like, okay, I'm done with that. And I moved on to just using paper. But this time around, I needed not white watercolor ground. I needed a transparent one because I wanted that copper to kind of shine through. Oh, I forgot. I also had to like scratch the surface a bit so the watercolor ground kind of stuck to it. Apparently that's what you have to do. You have to sand it a bit. So that's what I did. And then the watercolor transparent ground, and then left it to dry for 24 hours, and then went over with graphite and then with the Mars Black, and I painted it. But the thing was that it never got that shiny look anymore because I used a watercolor ground all around, and it just doesn't have that same shine. So yes, it did absorb the watercolor, but I just don't like it because it doesn't have that shine. I could probably sand it back again, but basically the part that I really wanted the copper to shine is through these whites of the bowl. So that didn't quite work, but it probably will work if I used oil. So I'm gonna keep this in my toolkit as like when I go back to oil painting or drawing oils for that matter. Yeah, that would be a great, I think I'll do that. Using drawing oils for this copper plate someday, but it's not cheap, so I probably have to practice a bit more with the drawing oils. But if you're interested in drawing oils, I have a video on that. For my next study, I went back to Aquabord again and painted the woman in mantilla. So because the panel is quite small and I wanted to test it out, I kind of zoomed into the portrait to create this piece, but I love how it turned out. For the first layer, I just went quite intuitively with like very watery layers. For the second layer, I created these dots, but these dots were quite difficult because I kind of wanted to mix in different colors, but I guess the underneath layer wasn't dry, so when I put some of these, dots on top of each other, they just like connected and then became one blob, which I wasn't happy about. So you really need to be patient with these and work in layers. Like patience is the key. Patience and delicacy. When you're working in the second or third layer, it's better you have that paper towel in hand to soak up most of the water so you don't have too much in that brush to then lay on top of these. Maybe because I'm working on a very small panel right here, I didn't have the exact scrubbing brush, because apparently you can like lift these if you go in with a wet brush and scrub it. So I did do that in some areas like here, and it kind of worked well, but I think I need a really small but very strong scrubby brush for this. But really enjoyed it, learned a lot from this process. And one thing I would mention I probably use the Aquabord for is when I want to do more tighter works. And when I say tighter, my paintings are quite loose, and I like to be more kind of loose and expressive basically, and do a lot of splatters and those kind of work, I just feel like the Aquabord doesn't quite fit. But when I want to do more tighter works, maybe I can give you an example. I think these Aquabords will shine, and it'll give me less pain of thinking about the framing and varnishing and so forth. And the way the colors pop out is like almost close to hot press paper, because hot press paper compared to cold press is that the colors are more vibrant. So for the final painting, I basically went back to hot press paper. The reasons are, one, because I'm creating these Masters Reimagined series, and surface just says it all. Like, it's one way of communicating your style, and I just feel like I want that cohesiveness. So I was planning to go back to hot press. So here I am using Arches hot press paper. And also for each of these Masters Reimagined series, I basically picked two elements that I like about these artists. And for Pablo Picasso, I think it was the simplicity of the lines. The bowl kind of says it all. So I kind of narrowed down to lines, and this woman in Mantilla reminds me of Klemt's work in how there's big form of shapes right here. So the form is like a silhouette, and I like that element of it. And that's what I wanted to kind of carry on in this painting. First, I chose a reference photo, and then I chose the moth that would be painted for Pablo Picasso, and I chose this Picasso moth. And I just loved how it had these designs in it. And then next came color. Now, when I chose the color, I thought I want something that is between his blue period and his rose period. And I wanted something in the middle, because those are the times that I love his work. And so I chose Shiminka Glacier Green, was something I really associate with Pablo Picasso's blue period. And then I chose the Tundra Orange, as well as the Rose Doré, which these two remind me of his rose period. And yellow ochre I just had for a backup, because I knew the Picasso moth will need that color. And basically what I did was I used this Palette Scout by Zolly. I have a link down below if you're interested. It'll help support this channel. And I just love this because it's like a game changer, seriously. And I have a whole video where I unbox it. But this ocean is the color that comes close to the Shiminka Glacier Green. So I picked that, and then I chose the palette ideas that it tells you what colors will go with this. And what's so funny is that I tend to be drawn to triadic colors, and when I saw this I was like, oh my god, there we go, triadic again. And see, the pink is very close to this one, the yellow or the orange is pretty close to that one, although this is closer, but I just thought that'll work. So that's what I went with, having in mind that Pablo Picasso really simplified the shapes to get it to the core essential of the design of a bowl. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try simplifying his portrait. How can I do that? And I went into the shadows of the reference photo, and I went in with using the Shiminka's Glacier Green over the areas that was dark first. I went darkest dark first, and then I let that dry and then painted over it second time around. And then once that was done, I then moved into painting the moth because that had color, and then I can adjust the rest depending on what that looks like and what's missing. So I painted it with the yellow ochre, the rose doré, and then the hematite. Actually, I did use that color. Where is it? Hematite Violet Genuine, because I didn't want to use black for the portrait. And then I used some of the Glacier Green here, and then I created some splatters, and I was like, okay, how does the painting look? Should I leave it with just the blue? And then I looked at it, I was like, no, I think we do need the warmth. So I added the Tundra Orange on the areas where the light was hitting, and then basically I added the accent color of the Rose Doré on his cheek and also created this splatter right here. Finally, I went inside the eyes with acrylic like Blanc. And then I used this Caran d'Ache Luminance pencil, the light cobalt blue, to create these contour lines for his ears, the brim of his hat, the top of his hat, the under his chin, and also the collar area, and I call it a day. I really loved how this painting turned out, and I have to say that I'm just naturally drawn to hot press paper. But by me trying out and experimenting with different surfaces, it teaches me why exactly I love hot press. And then I think that kind of helps me be like, no, it's okay. If I still need framing, I still need framing, but this is the surface that works for me as an artist. Basically, for me, the splatters and creating those like dots, can you see them? Like when I splatter, I want this texture, but I think other surfaces wouldn't quite get that shape, you know? So I think as artists, we just need to keep experimenting. We might find something that we truly love and we want to come back to. I'm definitely using the Aquabord for some different style of works that I want to explore, but for now, I'm sticking with my hot press paper. This project reminded me that surface isn't just a material, it's a collaborator. I think what surface really does, it shapes how we paint and how we communicate what we feel. Would I use the Aquabord panels? Yes, I will. But it'll be for a very specific style that when I feel like I want to paint. And would I paint on the copper panel? Probably not with watercolor, although I'm very interested in using it to paint with drawing oils. And having that said, with the Ampersand Aquabord, I just wanted to see how the colors come out. These are the colors that I typically come back to over and over, and look how pretty they are. They're just so vibrant. I just love it. So this might make me want to use them more, and I might just have to continue painting on them to see where it goes. And I'm kind of thinking about varnishing half of this to see what it does look like. Because at the end of the day, why do we varnish our works? Now I'm getting into a different subject, and I think this would be for another video, but why do we varnish our works? To protect it from UV, also protect it from water. And I'm doing a lot of tests with direct sun, and these are the colors that, like, some of them didn't stand the sun, but most of them are excellent light fast. And that means that I wouldn't need the UV varnish, but I probably need the other varnish that will protect it from water. So I probably do a test, half of them with that golden archival varnish, and see how that goes.